Maria Alvarez collapsed on wet pavement, three men's footsteps fading into rain. But one sound they didn't hear was the low growl of a German shepherd 2 blocks away, already tracking their scent. Quick question before we continue. If someone attacked your spouse, how fast could they call you? Drop your city in the comments. And if you think every couple deserves a panic button and a well-trained dog, hit subscribe. We're 500 away from 1K, and honestly, Atlas is doing more work than half of you. Don't let a dog outwork you. Now, back to that rainy street. The neon sign outside Alvarez family kitchen cast red and gold reflections across rain-slicked asphalt. Maria pulled the restaurant door closed at 11:47 p.m., testing the lock twice the way Daniel had taught her, once to engage, once to confirm. The street was empty in that specific way cities get just after the dinner rush ends, but before the bars close. Quiet, but not silent. Just waiting. She didn't see them until they were already moving. 3 shapes detaching from the alley across the street, footsteps synchronized, purposeful, not random, not accidental. Men who'd been watching, waiting for the lights to go dark and the last car to pull away from the curb. Maria's keys were still in her hand when the first one grabbed her shoulder. The attack was designed to overwhelm, hand over mouth, arm around throat, pressure building until vision started to tunnel. They wanted silence, compliance, the kind of fear that makes people forget to notice details. But Maria Alvarez had been married to a Navy SEAL for 12 years. She'd heard the stories Daniel couldn't fully tell, learned the protocols he'd insisted on teaching her, practiced the breathing techniques that kept operators conscious under interrogation. Count to 4. Exhale slowly. Stay aware. Notice everything. She didn't scream, didn't thrash, just focused on staying conscious, on cataloging details her hindbrain was screaming at her to ignore. The smell of cigarette smoke on the one holding her, the scrape of boots, steel-toed boots, moving northeast toward the parking garage, the fabric of a dropped glove, dark blue, maybe navy, left behind in the struggle. When they finally let go and ran, Maria stayed on the ground longer than she needed to. Let them believe they'd broken something. Let them think the rain would wash away what they'd done. What they didn't know, couldn't know, was that 2 blocks north, Chief Petty Officer Daniel Alvarez was walking Atlas, his Belgian Malinois military working dog, through the final patrol of their private security shift. What they didn't know was that Atlas had just gone rigid, nostrils flaring, reading chemical signatures in the air that told stories humans couldn't translate. And what they definitely didn't know was that Maria's left hand, still pressed against the wet pavement, had already triggered the emergency alert on her smartwatch, the one Daniel had programmed to send GPS coordinates, biometric stress data, and a silent alarm directly to his phone. The rain kept falling, the street stayed empty, but the clock had already counted down. Maria pulled herself to sitting, back against the restaurant's brick wall, and waited. Not for strangers with sirens, not for witnesses who hadn't been there when it mattered. She waited for the sound she knew would come, the deliberate footsteps of someone who ran to danger for a living, and the clicking of nails on pavement from a dog bred to find what others tried to hide. The last customer had left at 11:32 p.m. A regular, Mr. Chen, who always ordered the arroz con pollo and left exactly 15%. Maria had wiped down his table, counted the register twice, and started the closing routine she could do with her eyes closed after 8 years of running Alvarez family kitchen. Floors mopped, stove burners checked and rechecked, pilot lights confirmed off. The smell of sofrito and roasted garlic still hung in the air, mixing with pine sol and the particular exhaustion that comes from standing for 12 hours straight. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket. One text from Daniel, sent 40 minutes ago. Finishing patrol, home by midnight. Love you. Maria smiled. Typed back, locking up now. See you soon. Added a heart emoji, then deleted it because Daniel would tease her about it later, then added it back anyway because 12 years of marriage meant you stopped pretending to be cool. The neon sign hummed as she flipped the switch, plunging half the street into shadow. Red and gold lights reflecting off rain-slicked pavement, making everything look like an oil painting. Beautiful in that melancholy way cities get after dark, when most people are already home. She locked the door, tested it twice, once to engage the deadbolt, once to confirm. Daniel's voice in her head. Security is a habit, not a reaction. The street was empty, not unusual for a Tuesday in November. The bodega 3 doors down had closed an hour ago. The dry cleaner's metal shutters were drawn. A single car sat parked under a broken streetlight, but it had been there since Maria arrived at noon. She'd noticed it because the passenger window had a crack that looked like a spider web. Rain fell in that persistent way that wasn't quite heavy enough for an umbrella, but wasn't light enough to ignore. Maria pulled her jacket tighter and started toward her car, parked in the small lot behind the building. 30 feet, that's how far she made it. The first indication something was wrong wasn't visual, it was auditory. The rain's rhythm changed, interrupted by footsteps that were trying to be quiet, but weren't quite quiet enough. 3 sets, moving in sync, coming from the alley across the street. Maria's hand tightened on her keys, positioning them between her fingers the way Daniel had shown her during one of those Saturday morning just-in-case lessons she'd half listened to while making coffee. She didn't turn around, didn't run, just kept walking, angling slightly toward the streetlight, toward visibility, toward any space that wasn't shadowed. They closed the distance faster than she expected. The first one grabbed her shoulder, rough hand, calloused palm, grip that meant business. Maria's body reacted before her mind fully processed the threat, twisting away, mouth opening to scream. The second one's hand clamped over her face before sound could escape. Chemical smell, not cologne, something industrial, paint thinner maybe, or solvent. His other arm wrapped around her throat, pressure building at the carotid, the kind of chokehold designed to shut down consciousness in seconds. This is how people disappear, Maria thought with sudden, terrible clarity. This is how it happens. The third man moved to her left, blocking any angle of escape. She caught a glimpse, baseball cap pulled low, dark jacket, work boots with steel toes that scraped against wet pavement. Young, maybe 30, eyes that wouldn't meet hers. Wallet, phone, now. The one holding her throat spoke directly into her ear, breath hot and stale. Maria's vision started tunneling, black edges creeping in from the periphery. Her lungs screamed for air her body couldn't access. Panic clawed at her chest, primal and overwhelming. But underneath the panic, something else stirred. Something Daniel had drilled into her during those kitchen table conversations about worst-case scenarios. Something she'd rolled her eyes at, but absorbed anyway, because that's what you do when you love someone who's seen the worst humanity offers. Count to 4. Control the exhale. Stay conscious. Notice everything. She stopped struggling. Let her body go slightly slack, giving them the illusion of compliance. Conserved oxygen. Focused not on the terror, but on the details. The one choking her smelled like cigarettes. Marlboro Reds, she thought. The sweet, acrid combination Daniel had described from interrogations overseas. His jacket was polyester, cheap, the kind sold at discount stores. His watch scraped against her neck, metal band, not leather. The one demanding her wallet had a tattoo on his right hand. I couldn't see the design, but the ink was dark, professional work. The third one, the quiet one in work boots, kept shifting his weight, nervous. This wasn't routine for him. He kept glancing toward the alley they'd emerged from, like he wanted an excuse to leave. I said wallet. The voice got louder, more desperate. The arm around her throat tightened. Maria's left hand fumbled toward her jacket pocket, fingers clumsy from oxygen deprivation. Found her wallet, let it drop to the pavement. But her right hand, the one they couldn't see, pressed against the side of her smartwatch. Triple-clicked the crown. The emergency SOS function Daniel had programmed 3 months ago, the one she'd practiced activating but never actually used. The watch vibrated once against her wrist. Confirmation. GPS transmitted. Biometric stress markers uploaded. Silent alarm sent to the one person who'd know exactly what it meant. The man holding her throat finally released pressure, shoved her forward. Maria's knees hit wet pavement, hands catching her fall, lungs gulping air that tasted like rain and asphalt, and blood from where she'd bitten her tongue. "Stay down," someone said. Then footsteps, running, northeast, toward the parking garage 2 blocks over, where the lighting was worse and the cameras had blind spots. Maria stayed on the ground. Let them think she was broken. Let them believe the rain would wash away evidence and fear would keep her silent. She counted to 30, slow, deliberate breaths. Then it looked up. The street was empty again, just rain and neon and the distant sound of traffic, like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't just tilted sideways. Maria's hand found the brick wall of her restaurant, used it to pull herself upright. Her throat ached, her knees were already starting to bruise, but her mind was clear, cataloging, documenting. Dark blue glove on the pavement where one of them had dropped it during the struggle. Boot prints in the thin layer of mud near the alley entrance, distinct tread pattern, size 11 or 12. Direction of escape, northeast toward 4th Avenue. And somewhere 2 blocks north, a notification was landing on Daniel's phone. A notification that would tell him his wife's heart rate had spiked to 160. Her location hadn't moved in 3 minutes, and the emergency protocol they'd hoped never to use had just activated. Maria leaned against the wall and waited, not for police sirens or strangers' help. She waited for the sound she knew would come, the specific cadence of Daniel's run, the one he'd perfected over hundreds of training miles, and the clicking of Atlas's nails on pavement as 80 pounds of Belgian Malinois closed the distance between protection and the person who needed it most. The rain kept falling, but somewhere in the darkness, a clock was counting down to the moment these 3 men would learn that some victims aren't victims at all. They're just buying time. Maria's hands were shaking, not from fear, though there was plenty of that, but from adrenaline her body didn't know how to process. She pressed her palms flat against the wet brick wall, grounding herself in texture and temperature. Cold, rough, real. The rain had intensified, drumming against the pavement with enough force to blur the boot prints she'd been cataloging. In another 5 minutes, they'd be gone completely. In 10, it would be like nothing had happened here at all. That thought should have terrified her. Instead, it sharpened her focus. Maria pulled her phone from her jacket pocket with fingers that still wouldn't steady. The screen was cracked, must have happened when she'd hit the pavement, but functional. 11:54 p.m., 6 minutes since the attack. 6 minutes since her watch had transmitted its silent scream into the digital void. No missed calls yet, no texts, but Daniel's phone would show the alert. She knew that much. The question wasn't whether he'd received it. The question was how far away he was when it landed. She tried to stand and immediately regretted it. Her left knee buckled, sending white fire up her thigh. She caught herself against the wall, breathing through the pain the way she learned during the one and only time she'd tried to join Daniel for his morning run. 3 miles that had felt like 30, her body screaming at her to stop, while he jogged beside her, patient and encouraging, explaining how pain was just information and you could choose what to do with it. Information, she thought now, looking at her torn slacks and the blood seeping through the fabric. Knees injured but functional, throat's going to bruise, ribs are sore but nothing feels broken. She documented it clinically, the way Daniel talked about post-mission debriefs. No emotion, just facts, because emotion could come later, after safety was confirmed and threat was neutralized. The blue glove still lay on the pavement 3 feet away. Maria stared at it, committing details to memory. Cotton blend, not latex. Work glove, the kind sold in multi-packs at hardware stores. Size large, navy blue with reinforcement on the palm and fingers. Cheap, disposable, the kind of thing someone bought specifically to throw away after use. But they dropped it, and that meant DNA, sweat, skin cells, the microscopic evidence that turned anonymous attackers into names and faces and court cases. Maria's phone buzzed. She nearly dropped it. Text from Daniel. Alert received. Where are you exactly? Her fingers flew across the cracked screen. Behind the restaurant, 3 men, northeast toward 4th Ave parking garage. I'm okay, they're gone. The response came in seconds. Stay there, don't move. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. 120 seconds. Maria counted them, 1 breath per second. The meditation technique Daniel had taught her during the worst of her anxiety after his 3rd deployment, when every knock on the door had felt like it might be uniformed officers with terrible news. She used the time to look, really look. The alley across the street where they'd emerged, dark, yes, but not completely. A security camera was mounted on the corner building, angled down toward the dumpsters. Probably belonged to the bodega. She'd never noticed it before because she'd never needed to. Would it have caught them? The angle looks wrong, but maybe. The car that had been parked under the broken streetlight was gone now. She was certain it had been there when she'd locked up. Silver sedan, older model, Pennsylvania plates, she thought, though she hadn't paid enough attention to catch the numbers. Getaway car or just coincidence? Her training, if you could call kitchen table conversations with a Navy SEAL training, told her to assume connection, not coincidence. Assume planning. Assume they'd been watching long enough to know her closing routine, to time their approach for maximum isolation. That thought made her stomach turn. How many nights had they watched? How many times had she locked up alone, unaware of eyes tracking her movements, learning her patterns, waiting for the right moment? The rain was washing away the boot prints now. Maria pulled out her phone again, hands finally steady enough to hold it properly, and took photos. Flash on, 3 different angles. The prints were already degraded, but maybe there was enough definition left for analysis. Then she photographed the glove, the alley entrance, the security camera, the general direction they'd fled, building a visual record because memory was unreliable and evidence mattered more than emotion. When, she reminded herself, not if. When Daniel and the police arrived, they'd need this. Every detail she could preserve would narrow the search, confirm the timeline, turn chaos into actionable intelligence. Footsteps. Maria's head snapped up, body tensing, keys finding their way back between her fingers in a grip that had become automatic. But these footsteps were different, not the synchronized predatory movement of earlier, just one person, running, fast but controlled, the gait of someone who ran every day, whose body knew exactly how to move efficiently, even in the dark and rain. And underneath that sound, the unmistakable click, click, click of nails on wet pavement. Atlas appeared first, rounding the corner at full sprint, a Belgian Malinois moving with the focused intensity of a guided missile. 78 pounds of muscle and training and absolute certainty of purpose. He saw Maria and broke stride for half a second, ears forward, assessing, then continued straight to her, nose working, reading the chemical story written across her clothes and skin and the air around her. Fear, adrenaline, the foreign scent of three men who had no business being this close. The dog sat, didn't jump, didn't bark, just positioned himself between Maria and the direction the attackers had fled, hackle slightly raised, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. 30 seconds later, Daniel appeared. He wasn't running anymore, moving fast but deliberately, scanning the street with the same systematic assessment Atlas had done. Threat evaluation, escape route analysis, environmental awareness, all happening simultaneously. His eyes found Maria, and something in his expression shifted. Not relief, not yet, just confirmation that the worst-case scenario he'd been running through in his head for the past 2 minutes hadn't materialized. "Are you hurt?" His voice was calm, professional, the tone he probably used on missions when emotion was a liability. "Throat, knees, pride?" Maria tried to smile, but her split lip made it sting. "They took my wallet, $40 and a library card." Daniel knelt beside her, hands gentle but efficient, checking her pulse, her pupils, the bruising already forming around her neck. "Did you lose consciousness?" "No, stayed aware the whole time." "Good." He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. "Ambulance is 3 minutes out. There are 4. I need you to tell me everything you remember. Direction, description, timeline. Can you do that?" Maria nodded, started talking. Northeast, 3 men, work boots, steel-toed, tattoo on one hand, the smell of cigarettes and solvent, blue cotton glove, Pennsylvania plates maybe, silver sedan. Daniel listened without interrupting, but his jaw tightened with each detail. When she finished, he stood and looked at Atlas. The dog was already on his feet, nose to the ground, reading the invisible story written in scent molecules and ground disturbance. His tail was up, but not wagging, working mode, locked in. "Atlas," Daniel said quietly. "Swake." Dutch command. "Search." The dog's head lifted. He moved to the spot where Maria had been attacked, circled once, then locked on to something humans couldn't detect. His body language changed, shoulders forward, tail rigid, every muscle tensed with purpose. He'd found their trail, and the look in Daniel's eyes said the men who'd left it had just made the last mistake they'd ever make in this city. Okay, pause. Who else just realized Maria is tougher than most action movie heroes? If you're the type who believes in being prepared for the worst, smash that like button. Comment on your country. I need to know if emergency smartwatches are universal or just an American paranoia thing. We need 500 more subs to hit 1K. Maria stayed conscious while being choked. You can't click a button? Let's go. Now, let's see what Atlas does with that scent trail. Daniel Alvarez had been 2 blocks north when Maria's emergency alert hit his phone. He'd been walking Atlas through the final security check of their Tuesday night route, a contract job for a medical office complex that paid enough to supplement his VA disability and keep the restaurant afloat during slow months. Routine work, boring mostly, which was exactly how Daniel preferred civilian life after 12 years of deployments, where exciting usually meant someone was trying to kill you. The phone had vibrated 3 times in rapid succession. Emergency pattern. Not a call, not a text. SOS alert. Maria's name. GPS coordinates 2 blocks south. Heart rate 161 BPM. Duration of distress 37 seconds and counting. Daniel's training had kicked in before his conscious mind fully processed the information. Emergency protocols, the ones you drilled until they became muscle memory, until thinking slowed you down. He'd started running, not the panicked sprint of someone chasing fear, but the controlled pace of someone covering ground efficiently while conserving energy for whatever came next. Atlas had matched his stride instantly, the way military working dogs learn to do, reading human body language, understanding that shift from routine patrol to active mission without needing commands. They'd covered 2 blocks in 90 seconds and found Maria alive, injured but conscious and documenting evidence like she'd been doing this her entire life instead of learning it secondhand over kitchen table coffee. Pride and rage warred in Daniel's chest as he checked her injuries. Pride that she'd stayed calm, gathered intelligence, activated the protocols they'd practiced but hoped never to use. Rage at the men who'd put their hands on her, who'd looked at his wife and seen vulnerability instead of the strength it took to run a business, raise a family, love someone whose job required absence more often than presence. Now Atlas was locked onto their scent trail, and Daniel's job was to channel that rage into something useful. Atlas easy. Daniel's hand rested on the dog's tactical harness, feeling the tension vibrating through 78 pounds of barely restrained drive. Slow track, document, don't engage. The dog's pace shifted, still focused but methodical now, nose down, working the ground in a pattern Daniel had seen hundreds of times in Afghanistan. Scent discrimination, following the chemical signature of 3 specific individuals through the ambient chaos of an urban environment. Atlas paused at the alley entrance, circled, alerted with a sit. Good boy. Daniel marked the location on his phone's GPS app, took photos. Evidence collection, not pursuit, because this wasn't Kandahar and he wasn't operating under combat ROE. This was Philadelphia, and there were laws, procedures, chains of custody that mattered if he wanted these men prosecuted instead of just scared. His phone rang. Sergeant Chen, Philadelphia PD, 3rd District. Daniel had worked with him on a canine demonstration 6 months ago, mutual respect, built on shared understanding of how working dogs operated. Alvarez, got your civilian assist request. Are you tracking? Atlas has a scent. 3 individuals, northeast vector toward the 4th Avenue parking structure. My wife positively identified them as her attackers approximately 8 minutes ago. EMTs are with her now? Affirmative. Minor injuries, refused transport. She's documenting evidence. A pause on Chen's end, probably processing the fact that an assault victim is photographing crime scenes instead of breaking down. Your wife is in the military? Negative. Just married to an idiot who can't turn off instructor mode. Chen laughed, short and sharp. We've got units rolling. Stay on comms. If Atlas alerts to an active subject location, you hold position and call it in. Clear? Crystal. Daniel ended the call and looked at Atlas. The dog was already moving, pulling gently against the leash, nose working an invisible trail that existed in a sensory dimension humans couldn't access. They moved northeast, past the bodega with its security camera that might or might not have caught useful footage, past the dry cleaner and the vacant storefront where someone had spray-painted "Rise Up" in letters 3 feet tall. Atlas paused at a bus stop, alerted again. Daniel photographed the location, noted the time, 12:04 a.m. The trail was fresh, 10 minutes old, maybe less. The dog continued, across 3rd Avenue, through the intersection where a taxi sat idling at a red light, drivers watching them with the cautious curiosity people reserve for men with large dogs moving with purpose through rain-soaked streets at midnight. The parking garage loomed ahead, 4 stories of concrete and shadows and vehicles that could hide a dozen escape routes. Atlas's pace quickened, body language shifting from tracking to alerting, the distinction subtle but unmistakable to anyone who'd worked canines operationally. They were close. Daniel's hand found his phone, speed-dialed Chen. Subject location likely 4th Avenue parking structure. Atlas is showing final approach indicators. Copy. But Atlas wasn't holding. The dog had locked on to something specific, pulling harder now, training overriding obedience because the scent had gone from trail to source. Daniel saw it a half-second after Atlas did. Movement in the parking garage's ground floor. 3 figures, partially obscured by a concrete pillar. One of them was pulling something from a trash can. The blue work gloves match, probably. Evidence disposal. They hadn't seen him yet, too focused on their nervousness, on the adrenaline come-down that follows violence, on the false confidence that came from escaping initial consequences. Daniel held Atlas back with pressure on the harness, waited, watched. One of them lit a cigarette, Marlboro Red, the sweet, acrid smell carrying even across 30 yards of rain-saturated air. Same smell Maria had described from the one who'd choked her. The quiet one, work boots, nervous energy, kept checking his phone, looking for something, confirmation that they'd gotten away with it maybe, or directions to wherever they'd planned to go next. The third stood with his back to Daniel, but his right hand was visible, dark tattoo across the knuckles, professional work, like Maria had said. Atlas growled, low, barely audible, the sound a military working dog makes when every instinct says engage, but training says wait. Daniel's grip tightened on the harness. Easy, we wait for backup. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about Maria getting justice through a system that would put these men in prison instead of a hospital. It was about teaching them that attacking someone's wife came with consequences that lasted longer than the 30 seconds it took to run away. Sirens in the distance, growing closer. The 3 men heard them too, heads turning, body language shifting from relaxed to alert. One of them said something Daniel couldn't hear. They started moving, not running yet, but walking fast, splitting up, each heading toward a different exit. Standard evasion, separate to divide pursuit, regroup later. Except they'd made one critical miscalculation. They'd assumed the immediate threat was police sirens and flashing lights. They'd assumed that if they could just get out of the parking garage before cruisers arrived, they'd blend into the city's late-night anonymity and disappear. They'd never considered that the real threat wasn't behind them in marked cars with sirens screaming. It was standing 30 yards away in the rain, holding the leash of a dog whose nose could follow them through 3 counties and whose training had been funded by a military budget designed to find enemies who didn't want to be found. Daniel pulled out his phone, opened the tactical mapping app he'd used on deployments, marked all 3 exit vectors, sent the data to Chen with a single word, tracking. Then he looked at Atlas. The dog's eyes were locked on the tattooed man, the one moving toward the north stairwell, the one who'd probably been the leader, the decision-maker, the one who'd seen Maria lock up alone and thought of an easy target. Atlas, Daniel said quietly, Vulg, follow. The hunt had moved from documentation to pursuit. And somewhere ahead in the rain and darkness, 3 men who thought they'd escaped were about to learn that some consequences don't arrive with sirens. They arrive on 4 legs, with teeth designed to subdue threats, and a handler who'd spent 12 years learning that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just tracks, patiently, inevitably, until there's nowhere left to run. Atlas moved through the parking garage like water finding cracks, fluid, purposeful, impossible to redirect once momentum built. Daniel stayed 3 feet behind, leash loose enough to let the dog work, but taut enough to maintain control. The tattooed man had taken the north stairwell. Atlas confirmed it without hesitation, nose tracking the invisible chemical trail left by stress sweat and adrenaline. the biological signature of someone who'd just committed violence and was now trying to escape it. "Atlas, langsan." Slow. Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. The dog's pace decreased, but his focus didn't. Each step deliberate, reading scent layered on concrete that had been walked by hundreds of people, but only one who mattered right now. They reached the stairwell entrance. Atlas paused, circled, then sat hard, looking back at Daniel with eyes that said, "Here." Something was here. Daniel knelt, pulled out his phone's flashlight, swept the beam across concrete stairs, still wet from tracked-in rain. There, tucked against the base of the metal railing, a dark scarf. Navy blue, cheap polyester, the kind sold at gas stations and discount stores. Daniel photographed it without touching, marked the GPS coordinates, sent the image to Chen with the caption, "Evidence, north stairwell, ground floor, subject discarded en route." The scarf smelled like cigarette smoke even from 3 feet away, Marlboro Reds and fear sweat and the solvent Maria had described. Atlas's nose twitched, confirming what Daniel already knew. This was theirs, left behind in the scramble to distance themselves from what they'd done. Good boy. Daniel's hand found the spot behind Atlas's ears that the dog loved. "Zoek verder." Search further. Atlas stood, shook once, and continued up the stairwell. Second floor, third. The dog's body language shifted slightly, the scent getting stronger, fresher. They were gaining ground. At the fourth floor landing, Atlas alerted again, this time to a trash can near the elevator bank. Daniel looked inside. Blue work glove, the match to the one Maria had photographed. Polyester blend, size large, navy with gray reinforcement. And underneath it, wadded up like trash, a black baseball cap. Daniel's jaw tightened. They were shedding evidence, trying to transform from 3 men who'd attacked a woman into 3 anonymous faces in a city of 2 million people. It would have, probably, if Maria had panicked instead of observed, if Daniel had been across town instead of 2 blocks away, if Atlas had been a pet instead of a military working dog whose training cost taxpayers $50,000 and 4 years of specialized development. But she hadn't, he hasn't, and Atlas was worth every dollar the government had spent teaching him to do exactly this. Daniel's phone buzzed. "Chen, units have east and west exits covered. You're 20? Daniel typed back. 4th floor, north side. Subject shedding evidence. Still tracking. Do not engage. Observe and report. Copy. Atlas was already moving again, pulling toward the exterior walkway that overlooked the street. The scent trail led outside, into rain that should have washed it away, but hadn't, because scent didn't work the way civilians thought it did. It wasn't just smell, it was skin cells and breath vapor and the microscopic debris that followed humans everywhere they went, invisible but present, readable to a nose that had been bred and trained for exactly this. Daniel stepped onto the walkway. He looked down. The 4th floor gave him a tactical advantage, high ground, wide field of view. He could see the street below, the police cruisers boxing in the parking garage's main entrance, the officers taking positions that looked casual but weren't. And he could see the tattooed man, 40 feet away, moving along the exterior walkway toward the emergency stairwell on the far side, trying to avoid the elevators and main stairwell where security cameras would catch him. Smart, or would have been if he'd known about the dog currently tracking his exact route with precision that made security cameras look like guesswork. Daniel held Atlas back, pulled his phone, took 3 photos, clear shots of the man's face, his right hand with his distinctive knuckle tattoo, his body language that screamed guilty consciousness. Send to Chen, primary subject. Fourth floor exterior walkway approaching southeast emergency exit. The response came in seconds, units moving to intercept, hold position. But Atlas wasn't interested in holding the position. The dog's entire body had gone rigid, every muscle tensed, the way military working dogs look when they've located the target and training says engage, but commands say wait. Daniel's hand tightened on the harness. Blythe, stay. The tattooed man stopped walking, pulled out his phone, made a call. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language, nervous, agitated, looking over his shoulder every few seconds, checking escape routes, calculating odds. The call lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then the man pocketed his phone and started running. Not toward the emergency exit anymore, toward the interior of the garage, back the way he'd come, like someone had just told him police were blocking his original escape route and he needed to find another option. Atlas surged forward. Daniel held the leash tight, let the dog pull him into pursuit, but maintained control. They weren't military operators anymore. They were civilians assisting law enforcement, and that meant rules, protocols, chains of custody that mattered. Atlas, Fogg, no engage. Follow, no engagement. The dog understood. Pursuit mode, not apprehension mode. Track and locate, don't bite and hold. They moved fast, Atlas in the lead, covering ground with the efficient lope that looked relaxed but ate up distance. Daniel behind him, breathing controlled, muscle memory from thousands of training runs making this feel almost routine despite the adrenaline. The tattooed man reached the central elevator bank, hit the button, waited 5 seconds that must have felt like 5 hours. He looked back, saw Daniel and Atlas. His face did something interesting then. Recognition, fear, and a kind of confused disbelief all hitting at once, like he couldn't quite process why this stranger with a dog was following him, couldn't connect the dots between the woman he'd attacked 20 minutes ago and the man now 30 feet behind him with a canine whose body language screamed threat. The elevator dinged. Doors opened. The man stepped inside, hit a button. Doors started closing. Atlas reached the elevator 3 seconds too late, sat in front of the closed doors. Atlas looked up at the floor indicator. Going down, 2nd floor, 1st, ground. Daniel was already moving, heading for the stairs, phone to his ear. Chen, the subject is heading to the ground floor via elevator. Atlas has a scent. We're on him. Negative, Alvarez. Stand down. Let my people. He made me. Saw us tracking him. If he bolts, we lose him in the city. Silence on the line. Then, you maintain visual distance. Do not engage. Copy? Copy. Daniel took the stairs 3 at a time. Atlas matched his pace, all 4 legs working in perfect rhythm, the tactical harness distributing pressure so the dog could move at full speed without strain. Ground floor. Daniel burst through the stairwell door just as the elevator opened across the lobby. The tattooed man stepped out. He looked left. He looked right. Saw the police cruisers through the garage entrance, saw the officers taking positions, saw Daniel and Atlas emerging from the stairwell behind him. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Atlas did something that 78 pounds of Belgian Malinois does better than almost any other creature on Earth. He barked once, sharp, authoritative, the sound a military working dog makes when it wants a threat to know it's been identified, located, and assessed. The tattooed man's face went white. He bolted. South exit, emergency door that would trigger an alarm, but he was past caring about alarms. Daniel released the leash. Not full release, still connected, but with enough slack for the dog to run at combat speed. They cleared the garage exit into rain and streetlights and open pavement. The man was fast. Desperation is fast. But Atlas was faster. 20 feet, 15, 10. Daniel's voice cut through the rain. Atlas, vast! Hold. The dog didn't bite, didn't tackle, just cut in front of the runner, forcing him to either stop or trip over 78 pounds of controlled aggression. The man stopped, hands up, breathing hard. And from 3 directions, police officers closed in with the calm efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times. Sergeant Chen reached them first. I looked at Daniel, looked at Atlas sitting perfectly at heel, tail still, eyes locked on the suspect. "Hell of a dog," Chen said. Daniel's hand found Atlas's head. "He's had good teachers." They both knew Daniel wasn't talking about himself. Behind them, 2 more cruisers were rolling in. One had the quiet one in work boots cuffed in the back seat. The other had the leader, the one who'd choked Maria, who'd smelled like Marlboro Reds and thought rain would hide his crime. All 3, caught within 30 minutes of the attack, because a woman had stayed conscious and documented, because a husband had been close enough to respond, because a military working dog had followed a trail invisible to everyone but him. Chen pulled out handcuffs, read Miranda rights in a voice so practiced it sounded almost bored. Daniel pulled out his phone, texted Maria, "All 3 in custody, coming home." Her response came immediately. I never doubted it. Atlas looked up at Daniel, tongue out, tail finally wagging now that the work was done and the threat neutralized. And somewhere in the rain-soaked city, 3 men who'd thought they were hunters learned what it felt like to be prey. Daniel found Maria exactly where he'd left her, sitting on the bumper of an ambulance, an EMT wrapping her bruised knuckles while she argued about whether she needed x-rays. "It's just swelling," she was saying. "I can move all my fingers, see?" The EMT, a woman in her 50s who'd probably heard every variation of "I'm fine" in her career, gave Maria a look that said she wasn't buying it. "You can move them now, doesn't mean nothing's fractured." "I'll ice them at home. Daniel has a whole freezer full of gel packs from his knee surgery." Atlas reached Maria before Daniel did, pushing his head under her free hand in the universal dog gesture of "I'm here and you're safe, and also I would like pets, please." Maria's fingers found the familiar spot behind his ears. "Hey, buddy, good job tonight." The dog's tail wagged once, twice. Then he settled at her feet, body positioned between her and the street, still on duty even though the threat had been neutralized 30 minutes ago. Daniel caught the EMT's eye, got a small nod that meant, "She's stubborn, but she'll be okay." He'd seen that same look from medics in Afghanistan after missions where people refused evacuation despite injuries that warranted it. "All 3?" Maria asked, looking up at Daniel. "All 3. Chen's processing them now. They'll be arraigned in the morning." "The evidence?" "Scarf, gloves, security footage from the bodega, witness statements, and about 40 separate scent markers Atlas documented between your restaurant and the parking garage." Daniel sat down beside her on the ambulance bumper. "They're not walking away from this." Maria nodded, didn't say anything for a moment, just sat there with her bandaged hands and her bruised throat and the kind of exhaustion that came from holding yourself together through a crisis and finally being allowed to fall apart. Except she didn't fall apart. She just leaned into Daniel's shoulder and breathed. The EMT finished her work, left them with instructions about ice and elevation and signs of concussion to watch for. Told Maria she was tougher than most assault victims she'd treated, which wasn't a compliment anyone wanted, but Maria accepted it anyway, with a small, tired smile. The rain had stopped. The street had that scrubbed clean smell cities get after storms, all the grime temporarily washed away, leaving behind something almost peaceful. Police were still processing the scene, photographing, measuring, collecting the evidence Maria had documented. Sergeant Chen approached with a clipboard. Asking questions, Maria answered in the same calm, detailed voice she'd used to explain a menu item to a customer. Time of attack, physical descriptions, direction of flight, items taken, words spoken. She remembered all of it, every detail Daniel had taught her to notice during those kitchen table conversations that felt hypothetical until tonight when they'd become survival instructions. Chen closed his notebook. You did everything right, Mrs. Alvarez. Stayed conscious, gathered intel, activated your emergency system. Most people freeze. You documented. I had good training, Maria glanced at Daniel. Married to a professional paranoid. Prepared, not paranoid, Daniel corrected. You made me practice emergency protocols for 3 months. And tonight you used them. She couldn't argue with that. Chen left them with a card and instructions to come by the station tomorrow for formal statements. The ambulance pulled away, lights off, no urgency now that the crisis had passed. One by one, the police cruisers cleared out. The street returned to its normal late-night quiet. Distant traffic, the hum of street lights, the occasional car passing through intersections 2 blocks over. Daniel stood, offered Maria his hand. She took it, letting him help her to her feet, even though she probably didn't need it, because after 12 years of marriage, you learned that sometimes accepting help was a gift you gave someone else, not a weakness you admitted for yourself. They walked back to the restaurant, slow, Atlas between them, leash loose, his job done, but his vigilance never quite turning off. Maria's car was still in the back lot where she'd been trying to reach it when the attack happened. Daniel had already decided they were leaving it there tonight. He'd drive her home, come back for it tomorrow when daylight made everything feel less dangerous. You know what's strange? Maria said as they reached the restaurant's front door. I keep thinking about that moment when his hand was around my throat and I couldn't breathe, how scared I was. Daniel's jaw tightened. Maria, but I also remember thinking, Daniel taught me this. Count to 4, stay conscious, notice everything, and it worked. She looked at him. All those conversations I half listened to while doing inventory or prepping vegetables, they actually worked. You worked. I just provided information. You applied it. We're a team. She said it simply, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. And maybe it was. They stood there for a moment in front of the restaurant they'd built together through small business loans and 80-hour weeks and the kind of partnership that survived deployments and injuries and the 1,000 small separations that military life demanded. The neon sign was still off, the street is still quiet, but something had shifted. Maria pulled out her keys, unlocked the door she'd locked 90 minutes ago when the night had still felt safe. I need to check something, she said. Daniel followed her inside, watched as she moved through the familiar space, past tables she'd wiped down, past the kitchen where sofrito still lingered in the air, past the register she'd counted twice. She stopped at the back office, pulled out a box from under the desk. Inside, the emergency go bag Daniel had assembled 2 years ago, water bottles, first aid kit, flashlight, backup phone charger, $200 in small bills, and a copy of their important documents in a waterproof sleeve. I used to think this was overkill. Now I'm wondering what else we should add to it. Daniel's throat tightened, not from fear or anger anymore, from something else. Pride, maybe, or the specific kind of love that comes from watching someone you'd protect with your life learn to protect themselves. Pepper spray, personal alarm, maybe upgrade your smartwatch to one with fall detection. And a dog. Maria looked down at Atlas, who'd settled by her feet. Can we get one like him? Belgian Malinois aren't exactly beginner dogs. I'm not exactly a beginner anymore. She wasn't. Tonight has changed something fundamental, not broken her, hardened her maybe, or just revealed strength that had always been there, waiting for the moment it was needed. They locked up together, walked to Daniel's truck parked 3 blocks away. Atlas jumped in the back seat, circled twice, and settled with his head on his paws, finally allowing himself to rest. The drive home was quiet, not the tense silence of trauma, but the peaceful kind that comes after a crisis has passed and safety has been confirmed. Maria's hand found Daniel's on the gear shift, held it. "Thank you for being close, for training me, for Atlas. I'm just glad—" Daniel's voice caught, started again. "I'm just glad I got there in time." "You were always there. That's what the emergency system meant. That's what all the training meant. You couldn't be everywhere physically, but you could make sure I knew what to do when it mattered." She was right. That had been the point. Not to hover or control or let fear dictate their lives, but to build systems and knowledge and partnerships that worked even when distance or circumstance kept them apart. They pulled into their driveway at 1:47 a.m. The house was dark, but the porch light was on. Daniel had set it on a timer years ago, one of 100 small security measures that added up to something bigger than any single precaution. Inside, Maria headed straight for the bathroom, heard the shower start, knew she'd stand under hot water until her muscles stopped shaking and the smell of cigarette smoke and fear sweat finally washed away. He fed Atlas, checked the doors and windows, made chamomile tea Maria wouldn't drink but would appreciate him making anyway. She emerged 20 minutes later in pajamas, hair wet, bruises already darkening on her throat and knuckles, sat on the couch with her knees pulled up, accepting the tea with a small smile. "I keep replaying it, thinking about what I could have done differently. You survived. Everything else is details." "I want to do the self-defense class, that one you mentioned 6 months ago that I said I didn't have time for. I'll sign us both up tomorrow. And I want to learn how to work with Atlas, the commands, the hand signals, all of it." Daniel nodded. This wasn't fear talking. It was someone who'd discovered they were capable of more than they'd known and wanted to build on that foundation instead of hiding from it. Atlas padded over, rested his hand on Maria's knee. She scratched behind his ears, the motion automatic and soothing. "What happens now?" she asked. "With them, I mean, the 3 men. Arraignment tomorrow, trial in 6 to 8 months probably. With the evidence we have, your statement, the physical evidence, security footage, Atlas's tracking documentation, the DA will push for maximum sentences." "How long?" 5 to 10, probably. Assault, attempted robbery, conspiracy. They'll serve most of it." Maria nodded, sipped her tea. "Good. Not vindictive, not celebratory, just satisfied. Justice delivered through systems and evidence and laws that worked when people documented and reported and refused to let fear become silence." They sat in the quiet of their living room, Atlas between them, the night finally winding down to something that felt almost normal. Tomorrow there would be statements to give and bruises to ice and conversations with insurance companies and probably a reporter or two if the story made the local news. But tonight, right now, there was just this: a woman who'd survived, a man who'd protected, a dog who'd tracked, and the understanding that strength doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it looks like staying conscious when panic says surrender. Sometimes it looks like building systems years before you need them. Sometimes it looks like an 80-pound dog following a scent trail through rain because that's what he was trained to do, and training matters when chaos doesn't. Maria set down her tea, leaned into Daniel's shoulder, let herself finally, fully relax. "I love you," she said, "and I love that you're paranoid. Prepared. Both." Atlas sighed, a long, contented sound. Outside, the city continued its late-night rhythm. Cars passing, streetlights humming. The world is moving forward the way it always did, indifferent to individual moments of violence or justice or survival. But inside this house, 3 beings who'd been tested tonight and passed sat in the quiet dark and understood something most people never learn. That silence isn't a weakness, it's just strategy, waiting for the right moment to become strong. So, here's the deal. We need 1,000 subscribers so I can keep sharing stories about people who refuse to be victims. Comment below. What's your emergency plan? What city are you from? Share this with someone who needs to hear that preparation isn't paranoia, it's love. Because the world needs more Atlas-level loyalty and fewer excuses. See you in the next one.